If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
Experts tell us that the term boogaloo refers to a second civil war, and that members of this movement are using the current protests that are going on as a way to further their own cause.
The idea is to, on the one hand, increase racial tensions, because their ultimate goal is that they want a race war.
Georgia State University professor Mia Bloom says right-wing extremist groups such as the Boogaloos are inciting chaos and racial tension into local protest.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. I talked about this a couple days ago of what to look for with these riots and these protests, because remember, they have to tie in all of these agendas. You can't forget about, certain things. They're not just going to drop it. Don't forget how much time and money they invested in trying to remove the Second Amendment and engineering people to want it taken away. It is going to come back, and it's going to come back with these protests. It's really becoming obvious. And now stories have come out, of course, of this thing called the Boogaloo movement, or we should just call it the Boogerloo movement, because that's really what it is. The Boogerloo movement, gun-touting members showing up at protests. What they're claiming is that these people, known as the Boogerloos, are showing up at all the protests, of course, with assault rifles, right? Because remember that, has to be that. They're showing up with assault rifles, and they're igniting violence in the protests. So these are the people who are behind people becoming more violent. Some have been arrested in certain states for, starting violence, attacking people, trying to get people to, apparently, according to the plan, getting them to throw, fire cocktails at police officers to literally burn them alive. This is what they're claiming now, right? But remember, these protests have been more geared towards upheaval, right? Just like the Illuminati card game. Upheaval, division amongst citizens and police, looting, right? Burning things on fire, burning buildings, cars, and that type of stuff. And now it's going to become more violent amongst citizens, because that's part of the civil unrest that they want to have happen. Having these people show up at these protests, they're going to start. What you're hearing is they're naming the protests now as more peaceful protests. That's what it's coming out as here 6 days later, or whatever it is, a week later. They're saying the protests are becoming more peaceful protests, right? Which is what we're allowed to do, they claim as citizens, even though they're full of crap, because they don't let you peacefully protest. We saw that with the C-19. They wouldn't even let people get haircuts outside of municipal buildings without giving them tickets and fines. But anyway, we're hearing that it's becoming more and more peaceful. It's calming. There's not as much looting, not as much lighting things on fire, that people just want change and demand change. As this story starts to become pushed in the media, CNN, MSN, they're starting to report and show these photos of these people that are technically being regarded as a militia group, right? They show up. They have guns. Of course, this will be a staged operation, completely 100% run by your own government. What will likely happen is they'll probably claim, a shooting will go off, people will be killed, and then this will tie in the Second Amendment, right? We'll probably hear from David Hogg and some of these other people will come out, and they'll tie the change needs to happen. And it's not just about this racial movement. It's also about gun control and these people going after peaceful protesters and upheaval and all the code words that of order out of chaos here in the United States of America. So what you're seeing here, there's the Boogerloo movement. Let me read you some of the article here. Benjamin Teeter was at his home in Hampstead, North Carolina. When the call to action came, it was an alert from the heart of the raging protests in Minnesota, posted on an online forum by a fellow member of the Boogerloo movement, a loosely knit group of heavily armed anti-government extremists. So heavily armed, there's your key word there. The alert was from a man who had a run-in with the Minneapolis police while on the front line of the police brutality protest set off by the passing of Floyd. He said he caught Mace to the face, said Teeter, and put out a national notice to our network. After Teeter, who goes by Ryan, said he saw the online posting, he and a handful of other Boogaloo friends in the area mobilized. They grabbed their guns, mostly assault rifles, hopped in their vehicles, and made the 18-hour drive to Minneapolis. All right, a couple things there. First of all, we know that they're doing the tracing, right? We heard them even say anybody who's at these protests, they're going to pretty much do contact tracing, but through the cell phone, find out who you are, who you're affiliated with, right? So one of these people already have been caught and arrested. I mean, give me a break. If this isn't staged, I don't know what is. But I mean, I feel like I say that every day at this point. The Boogaloos are an emerging, and yes, Boogaloos. They're really called the Boogaloos, but I just can't even I mean, it's the stupidest name, right? Couldn't they come up with something better? I'm sure there's some gematria or something behind the name, but the Boogaloos are an emerging incarnation of extremism that seems to defy easy categorization. They are yet another confounding factor in the ongoing effort among local, state, and federal officials to puzzle out the political sympathies of the agitators showing up to the mostly peaceful rallies who have destroyed property, looted businesses, or in the case of the Boogaloos, descended on Minneapolis, walked around the streets with assault rifles. These members appear to hold conflicting ideologies or ideological views, with some identifying as anarchists and others rejecting formal titles. Some pockets of the group have are supporters of white supremacy, while others reject it. But they have at least two things in common: an affinity for toting around guns in public, and their Boogaloo rallying cry, which is commonly viewed as code for another U.S. Civil War. Right? So this is exactly what I've been talking about, that they're going to need to tie in some way, shape, or form. It's not just going to be some guy there with a handgun. It's going to be some type of extremist militia type thing, so that, boom, they could just come forward and say, you know what, we've got these protests, we've got people with guns, we're going to not only bring in martial law, but we're going to need to get guns confiscated from anyone that we deem a white supremacist or dangerous, which, yes, we've already heard before. But if there was ever a perfect time and a perfect storm and a perfect cocktail that they drew up, now would be the time for them to carry this out. Unfortunately. And again, I've said a million times, I'm all for, if the government's allowed to bear arms and the military and the police are allowed to have weapons, then the citizens should be allowed to. It's as simple as that. I mean, anyone who disagrees with that, look, and you're like, oh, I think guns are stupid and all that stuff, that's fine. That's fine. Then take them away from the government, take them away from everyone else, because nobody can trust in our government. Even people who think that my channel is insane and stuff like that, you can agree on one thing: the government can't be trusted. I mean, people have seen that from every organization all the way down, from even the FDA and what they put in our food, to the CIA. These corrupt groups, the CDC, people are now seeing what a scam the CDC is. So they're saying that it is now growing on mainstream platforms, this movement. In the moment of protest, it is starting to move offline. So these people who are online as these, anti-this anarchist groups, and they'll probably even classify someone like me as that, even though I don't even own a weapon. My weapons are my right hand, and I guess my left, which isn't as good as it used to be, but that's another story for another day. They're saying that they're moving offline. It resembles the militia movement that came before it, which has been well documented as a force for promoting violence. If people are going to initiate any type of deadly force against us, we need to be willing and able to initiate deadly force in return. That is what this group is saying, right? And so in other words, they're saying police officers who are using any type of touch, even touching them or trying to remove them from places where they feel that they have the right to be, they're going to look at it as some type of deadly assault towards them, which in return allow them to use their firearms. And look, if anything does happen, I don't think it would be along the lines of civilians against this group. It would be a perfectly put together psyop between the police and the militia group, right, where there's some type of shootout. And it could carry over, obviously, to, other people, innocent bystanders were hit. But I mean, this is what you have to look for in these psychological operations is what are they hinting at coming next, right? What are they talking about? This is the story that's quietly now coming up about these militia groups coming off the internet, these white supremacy groups that are now going to take it to the streets, who are going to keep themselves armed, and they're going to show up and incite hate and violence at these rallies. And we know how important the Second Amendment is to them, to getting rid of it and abolishing it. And if you were going to ask me a few years ago what would be the one thing that they might be able to get rid of, I would say that, because of how badly they have been tricking people with these psyops, with the schools and everywhere else over the last couple decades. But, ironically, free speech is really what's been hit the most, because we've got this new thing called hate speech. And someone like me is a perfect example of, getting strikes for talking about the LGBT, right? And only being able to talk about certain stuff on my own website, not on public platforms like this. So keep an eye out on it. Obviously, it's something that it's going to come up more and more at the protests. I guarantee you that you'll hear something about the Boogaloo. It'll become more of a known thing, a known militia group in the United States. And maybe they'll rename it because they're going to probably say it's the stupidest name ever and it's not very intimidating. But keep an eye on this stuff with what's going on with the riots and the protests, because remember, the Second Amendment is something they have to, in their own minds, get rid of. They cannot have the civilians armed, especially with bringing in martial law and everything else that they have planned, especially with, all the nonsense going on in today's world. It's really never ending. I thank everyone out there for listening to today's show. God bless all of you and your families.